Good evening, viewers and listeners, and welcome to this another edition of the program Serving the People, which is brought to you courtesy the Democratic Republican Party, the DRP. I'm your host, Mrs. Anissa Batiste, and please let us start with a word of prayer, as usual. Loving Father in heaven, thank you for another opportunity to speak the truth to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Bless me as I do so, and may they know the truth and nothing but the truth. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And now, dear viewers and listeners, let me remind you that if you wish to contact me at this program, you may do so by calling telephone number 528-1015. That's 528-1015. Or you may send an email to our address. It is servingthepeople.ab@gmail.com. That's servingthepeople.ab@gmail.com. And this information is on your screen, and I'll repeat it towards the end of the program for your assistance. Now, let me just give you certain information concerning the Democratic Republican Party before we go into this evening's discussion. I would just like to inform you that soon we will be going on a membership drive throughout the country. We will be coming to different constituencies to you to talk to you about becoming members of the Democratic Republican Party and how you can join us, how you can serve us, how you can serve the people through this new entity that has been created as a viable alternative to what we have as current governance, and it has been created for you. We will come to you, we will have membership forms, and soon a membership form will be online as well on the internet. As a matter of fact, it's already there, but we're still doing some work on the website. I used to have a website called anissabatiste4weststgeorge.com, anissabatiste4wsg.com. It is being recreated and transformed into a site for the Democratic Republican Party, svg.com. As soon as it is up and running, I will let you know, and an online registration form for the DRP will be there, where you can just click join us and you can put in your information and register online, and we will get that information so that wherever you are in the world, whether you're in the US, New York, England, Canada, wherever you are as Vincentian and you're interested in joining us and supporting us, you can do so online as well. I'll inform you when everything is confirmed. Also, just to let you know that we have some very exciting projects to implement towards the end of the year. I wouldn't say much in terms of details about it now, but you can look forward to see the Democratic Republican Party in action as we come close to the end of the year. I look forward to partnering with other organizations abroad, Vincentians in the diaspora, in bringing chair and much needed assistance to you, our people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now, in this evening's program, I would like to address in some way the issue of the property tax legislation that was recently passed in the House of Assembly. The main issue being that we have now moved from a rental value-based assessment system for property tax to market value-based assessment. Basically, what we've been told by our government is that the property tax that is required to be paid by persons will no longer be assessed or determined based on rental value, but it will now be determined based on the current market value of the property, a percentage thereof. We want to talk about this in this program because the Democratic Republican Party, of which I am founder, wishes to remind the public of some very important facts related to the issue of property rights and market value. Let us go back in history for a moment and let us examine the behavior of this current administration, the Unity Labour Party. In 2009, St. Vincent and the Grenadines was engaged in a constitution reform exercise, and we were looking towards the date for a referendum election to adopt a new constitution. The Constitution Bill 2009 was before us, and there was a lot of debate on that bill. The Constitution Review Commission, which had been instituted to do the work of consultations with Vincentians here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as outside of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, had submitted a report to Parliament a few years earlier, 2006. In fact, the report was dated on the 28th September 2006. It was called the CRC's Revised Final Report to the House of Assembly. And in this report, they basically submitted to Parliament the consensus views of the people, which they had found when they went about doing their consultations. What were the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines saying about what they would like to see in a new constitution? Well, one of the issues which was raised by the people had to do with strengthening our right to private property by addressing some concerns in a section of our constitution. I believe it is section 30, which has to do with the protection from deprivation of property. I want us to look back at this discussion because it has bearing on what we are currently facing with the adjustment to the assessment basis of property tax in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Let me read to you what the CRC's report to the House of Assembly said that the people were saying they wanted to see. I quote for you from section 343 paragraph C, which was found on page 92 of that 28th September 2006 report. It said, and I quote, "When compensation is assessed for compulsorily acquired property, such compensation should be assessed on the basis of the open market value of that property as at the date of the compulsory acquisition." End of quote. So here we have the CRC reporting to the Parliament that the people in the consultations are saying that that section in our constitution that speaks about protection from deprivation of property, we want it to be strengthened to reflect the fact that when we are paid compensation for our property that has been acquired compulsorily, that compensation should be assessed on the basis of open market value of the property at the date of the compulsory acquisition. The people were basically saying, when you take our property by force, when the government has to acquire it compulsorily, we want them to guarantee us in the Constitution that we will be paid open market value for our property at the time it is being compulsorily acquired. This was the consensus of the people. This was the voice of the people to their government, who was undergoing constitution reform exercise. Lo and behold, the government did not grant the people what they wanted. I remember the Thusian Institute for Religious Liberty, of which I am a member and I am one of the associate directors. We took it upon ourselves to engage in this exercise and to make recommendations and comments to the CRC, to the Select Committee of the House of Assembly on the Constitution Bill 2009. We did a document. I have a copy here in my hand. It's called Concerns and Recommendations on the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Constitution Bill 2009, presented to the Chairman Select Committee of the whole House of Assembly, Kingstown, by the Thusian Institute for Religious Liberty, Incorporated, and it was submitted on Friday, July 10th, 2009. And on page 7 of our document, where we addressed that private property issue, we recommended that the consensus of the people, as reported in the CRC's report to Parliament, be given, it be granted. And we actually recommended that a certain phrase be included in that section of the Constitution to give effect to the wishes of the people. We said, and I quote, "TURL recommends the insertion of the following below clause 30," and it says, "provided that adequate compensation includes current market value of the property at the date of the compulsory acquisition. You see, the current constitution merely says that you should be compensated within reasonable time and that that compensation should be adequate compensation. But people were not satisfied that the phrasing adequate compensation guaranteed sufficiently their right in terms of ensuring that they would get current market value for their property which is being compulsorily acquired by the government. Hence, we recommended that a phrase be put in there to say that when the compensation is being done, it must be provided that adequate compensation includes current market value of the property at the date of the compulsory acquisition. We argued that this reflects the wishes of the people from the consultations. It would not limit the government from paying more than market value if they wanted to for things like relocation costs, etc., because it said it should include current market value. So that means it could be more. And it creates greater protection for the people's inalienable right to private property, as seen in this freedom from deprivation of property in our constitution. Like I said, unfortunately, dear people, the government did not grant the people's wishes. There was a lot of discussion about it, a lot of debate, you may remember. And finally, we were given this document. 3rd of September 2009, this was the bill, that was the Constitution Bill 2009 that was being presented to the people. And this had the final provisions that the government was asking the people to vote upon. And did they give the people what they wanted in Section 30? No, they didn't. They danced around it and put in a phrase which still did not reflect what the people wanted, and in fact, in my opinion, insulted the people by speaking of protection for the state as if it is the state who is at a disadvantage when property is being compulsorily acquired. Let me read the portion that they put in that they wanted us to vote yes to. When they speak of you getting adequate compensation if your property is being compulsorily acquired, they said, and I quote, "That is compensation which in all the circumstances is fair and reasonable to the person entitled to compensation and also to the state." Let me pause there. So here was the government saying to you who said to the CRC, we want current market value for our property when you are assessing it, when you're compulsorily acquiring our property. You said that to the CRC. They're working for you. The government is working for the people, not the other way around. Yet the government despised the voices of the people, treated it with contempt, and insisted in putting into your constitution a phrase which really didn't make any difference from how it is in the current constitution, because they repeated that the compensation should be fair and reasonable. The current constitution already says that the compensation should be within reasonable time and that it should be adequate compensation. What the people were asking for was a description, a detailed explanation of what that means to guarantee them they would get current market value. And then the government goes on to say that it must be fair and reasonable to the person being compensated and also to the state. In the fundamental rights and freedoms section of the Constitution, it is about the fundamental freedoms of the people. It is necessary to protect the people against government excesses and abuses. Why are you writing into the protection from deprivation of property for the people? Why are you writing into that the idea that compensation must be reasonable to the state? Is it the state who is being disadvantaged by having their property being compulsorily acquired? You know what compulsorily means? It means you didn't want to give it up necessarily. You don't necessarily want to move, but okay, the government says it has a project, a national project, it has to move these houses or whatever the case is. Okay, fair enough, we understand. But when you're doing it, make sure we get adequate compensation. But adequate compensation is too vague an expression. It must be explained to mean we will be guaranteed that we get current market value for our property. So why are you talking about compensation that is reasonable to the state? Is the state the one disadvantaged here? I took great issue with this phrasing in our constitution. I felt it was reflective of a government that was was not sensitive about the rights of the people, and that was more looking to protect itself as opposed to protecting the people, when really it is the people who need protection from the government and not the government who need protection from the people. And the government is there to serve the people and their interests. This is the truth. So the government did not give you what you wanted. We voted no, and rightly so, because there was too much contempt and disregard for the voice of the people. So they didn't give you what you wanted. Wasted money on consultations and pretend like if you're interested in the people's wishes, and when the people's wishes come forward, you still insist in the final draft that this is all you're prepared to do. You're not prepared to give the people what they wanted. Now today, where are we? We're in a situation where that same government brings a bill to Parliament to adjust property tax assessment basis. And hear what? They're now saying to you that we are demanding from you that when you pay your property tax to us, it must be assessed on the basis of current market value. Well, I find that to be hypocritical at best, because here we had the government who, when it is acquiring your property compulsorily, did not want to guarantee you current market value by writing it into the constitution for you. They didn't want to do that, but they can go to the Parliament with their simple majority, and pretty much by the stroke of a pen or a few votes, they can demand from you property tax on the basis of the same current market value that they didn't want to give just some time ago. What do you think about that, my dear people? It is hypocrisy, and it shows again that the government is more interested in serving its interests and not serving the people in terms of strengthening and ensuring protection for their God-endowed rights and freedoms. This is unacceptable. It exposes the government as being not pro-rights for the people and more selfish, concerned about their selfish interests. But let's talk about those interests for a bit, because where did this market value based property tax issue really come from? And by the way, think about the implications of that. But let's talk about where it came from. I'm holding in my hand a copy, just a printout of the Article 4 report of 2011 of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. And I recall when I was in Parliament debating the budget, I referred to this document to point out the kind of measures that the IMF was recommending that the government was actually agreeing to. But these recommendations were based upon the fact that the economy was in a bad state, and the government is now in a position where it is forced to do certain things to make revenue, much needed revenue. And sadly, it falls back on the people in the form of increased taxes, because book it and show, as we would say, your property tax assessed on the basis of current market value is going to be more than the property tax you paid assessed on the basis of rental value. What did the IMF say? And why am I saying that the government is falling into the hands of the IMF with this property tax measure? Yes, in this document, the IMF spoke about the situation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the rise in public debt, and the need for adjustments in fiscal policy. And under the section called Policy Discussions and Recommendations, we are told that our economy had certain underlying weaknesses which were showed up or which were exposed under the shock of the global financial and economic crisis and recent natural disasters. But more so, let's go down to an area dealing with the issue of revenue measures. And I want to read two portions, and I quote: "At the same time, there was broad agreement between staff and authorities that a number of measures to enhance revenues and rationalize current expenditures will have to be implemented over the next few years to help generate the planned primary surpluses, and reduce debt." So the IMF is telling us that when they met with our officials, our finance officials, members of staff and so on, they agreed, they committed to taking measures to enhance revenues because of the situation that we're in. Come on, think about it. the government was running a counter-cyclical policy for 7 years. We had a deficit for 7 years on the budget, a deficit on the current account. And this deficit was increasing each year. You understand? And they had to now adjust their policy to generate surpluses to reduce the debt. We had a rise in debt as a result of that deficit. What was one of the revenue measures? The first revenue measure that was recommended by the IMF. Let me read it to you. It says, introduce market-based property taxes. The authorities reiterated their commitment to introduce these in the 2012 budget. The Inland Revenue Department estimates that moving to a market value system could double the collection of property taxes. End of quote. This is what the IMF said. So what we have is a clear case of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the ULP administration, falling into the hands of the IMF, using these IMF measures to cover up the economic sores that they have created in this country. And they were actually told to introduce market-based property tax. And they agreed. They said the authorities reiterated their commitment to introduce these in 2012 budget, and they even claimed that the Inland Revenue Department said, well, if we do that, if we move from rental value system to market value based, if we move to that, we could double the collection of property taxes. So what is the government really concerned about? Are they concerned about how this will affect you and me? How it will affect our people's interest in acquiring property and so on further down the road? How it will affect the fact that rent will go up and the burden that will be put on the people because property taxes have increased? Are they concerned that it could increase more and more because current market value is a thing that goes up year after year because property value appreciates, and even though they try to keep it at a small percentage, it is still going to be more than the previous system we had? Are they concerned about that? Or are they just concerned about some quick fix to their revenue generating problems which they have created by their own fiscal policies over the last few years? That is the reality in this country. This does not show concern for the people. This does not show concern for the people's rights and freedoms. This does not show concerns for the people's freedom to enjoy their private property rights, which is God ordained and God endowed. This is truly unacceptable. We need a government that will be creative in its ideas, that knows how to get things done to cause the country to make money. A government that knows how to use the resources we have to put people to work and cause money to be generated again in this country. And stop trying to fix the problems by just taxing the life out of the people. Unacceptable. Then we are asked to accept this as a way to make money to help the country. My dear people, do not forget how they treated us. The contempt. When they want to take your property by force, compulsory acquisition. They didn't want to guarantee the Constitution current market value. But now, they go to the parliament and with the stroke of a pen, they demand the same market value-based property tax from you. And you have to do it. Because you see, when we voted no, because they lumped everything together and we had no choice, we couldn't say yes to this and no to that. We had no choice but to say no to everything. We couldn't get what we wanted, even in some cases. But even in this property issue, we still would not have got it. Because in the final draft, it didn't give the people what they wanted. So we are forced to accept that the government will not give us what we want. But when they want to take something from us, we are forced to accept that we have to give them what they want. I want you to pay attention to how the government of this country is treating the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is not right. It is not right. And here we are, approaching 33 years of independence, and this is the kind of thing that we are faced with. My dear people, let's talk a bit for the next 5 minutes about independence. I want to tell you happy independence. 33 years, indeed, of independence from a British monarchy, from colonialism, and we're no longer a colony of Britain, and we boast independence. But what really should we be celebrating at independence? What really is it about? And what should we appreciate and guard? Let me remind you What was it like in pre-independence times when monarchs reigned? Monarchs had absolute authority and political power. They made laws and they controlled your rights and freedoms. They controlled the rights and freedoms of their subjects. At their whims and fancies, they did what they wanted. People were abused, tortured, and some executed under the influence of kings and queens and under the influence of religious despots who had influence on those kings and queens. Yes, my dear people. In other words, in pre-independence times, under monarchies, we had no religious liberty, we had no right to life and no right to private property. If the king wanted to take your daughter and marry her, he could. And if she didn't please him today, tomorrow, and he wanted to have her head, he could. Study the story of King Henry VIII, for example. These things happened under monarchies because, you see, the kings and queens were seen as absolute rulers and your rights and freedoms were seen as coming from them, being in their hands to give and take as they please. But when we break from colonialism and we become independent of monarchies, what is to be appreciated is that the removal of a king or queen as the political head with powers is to recognize that rights and freedoms do not come from the king and the queen, but they come from God. And the political authorities that we have in place in an independent state, in this case a prime minister or a president or whatever the case may be in independent states, the political powers that we now have ought to view themselves not as absolute monarchs with your rights and freedoms in their hands to give and take as they please, but they are to view themselves as mere servants of the people whose duty is to respect the rights and freedoms of all of the people and to serve the people in so doing. They are to view themselves as persons who must identify and recognize the rights and freedoms of the people as God endowed and inviolable or not to be violated. This is the truth, my dear people. Instead of having a king and a queen ruling over us politically, we have our constitution. We have a constitution with freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom from protection from deprivation of property. We have rights, we have freedoms that are enshrined in our constitution that ought to be respected and guarded and protected by the government of the day. And so, when you want to judge how much we have really been independent, we have to ask ourselves, are our leaders today behaving like new colonists? Are they behaving like new kings and queens in a modern form with absolute power to tyrannize the people by infringing upon their rights and freedoms? Or are they behaving like genuine humble servants of the people with respect and sensitivity towards our rights and freedoms, recognizing that they are God-endowed or inalienable and as such inviolable or not to be violated? The latter is the kind of government and the kind of leaders we need. Not people who will persecute you because you disagree with them, fire you from your job, send you home on half pay, cause your family not to be able to get scholarships or eat or whatever because of biases, because you exercise your freedom to assemble and express yourself with one party or one group. We don't want a government like that, because that is a government that's behaving like the same monarchs, the same colonialists, and not behaving as if they understand how to lead in an independent state. And with that, I wish you a happy independence, because I'm saying we have a constitution with our rights and freedoms. Let's guard it. Let's respect it. Let's respect one another's rights and freedoms. Let's demand accountability from them whenever and wherever they infringe upon our rights and freedoms or threaten to do so. We'll continue this discussion another time. We have to go. But remember, you may call me at telephone number 528-1015. That's 528-1015. Until our next program, I'm Anissa Batiste, and may God bless you.